It has come to light that the refurbishment of South Africa's key military base, the Brug Mobilisation Centre outside Bloemfontein, is being funded by the Chinese government. Well, joining us in the studio is Kobus Marais, former DA Defence Shadow Minister and now a defence analyst, to discuss this development. Hi Kobus, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Linda. It's again a privilege to talk to you and your viewers.
Well, can you give us more detail about this project at the Brug?
Well, what we know about that is maybe one must just take a bit of a step back and look at how the whole defense capability and overall infrastructure has been deteriorated over many years. Yes, they've always blamed it on the budget, and they've always said, there's only one solution, and that's more money. However, we know that is not the case. You can have as much money as possible, but if you do not have the managerial capabilities, if you do not have the managerial leadership and political leadership, you can do whatever you want to, but it will most probably follow, the same route as the South African government and the whole, deteriorating, situation of South Africa. So it is not just budget, it is more than that. I have said at many stages in my time as the Shadow Defence Minister that my biggest fear is you mention all these challenges, you mention all these threats to our democracy and to our sovereignty. And my fear was that they will allow the deterioration to proceed until such a stage that it is either total collapse, or there must be a big brother stepping in to assist them.
So if South Africa needs assistance, who do you want this big brother to be?
I've always said that we are more aligned to NATO members because of our standards in our military and our defense industry. Our strategic and prime mission equipment mostly come from the European Union and America. So little or nothing is coming from the East Bloc and the non-NATO aligned members. Our maritime vessels, except for the 3 that was built in South Africa by Damon, which is also a NATO member, their head office, but the rest all coming from Germany, which is a NATO member, and in itself will have certain non-disclosure parts of the agreements when the transaction was established at the time. So when they go to another country, than the original equipment manufacturing countries, then that can be a major threat. Now, obviously, one must remember that we are within an environment of discussing or renegotiating trade agreements, not only with America, but with the European Union and the UK as well, which is by far our biggest markets and partners for earning foreign currency. Whereas with China, we don't earn net foreign currency. We've got a net deficit in foreign currency with China. However, I've picked up in my time that there was obviously this tendency to focus towards, first of all, Cuba, for all of their help, and we know that there's no way that Cuba has got have got the capabilities and the knowledge and the just the structure and the equipment that we require, and obviously Russia. And in a subtle way, China has come into play. You'll recall Exercise Mosey, which was highly controversial. The Russians has abused it as open and direct propaganda, which they have, worked through their official news agency TASS. Whereas the Chinese was part of the exercise with highly developed and modern vessels, but in a very subtle way. And I've always said my biggest fear is the Chinese. They work in a very subtle way. really taking notice, but they're always there, and they're always working with military leadership. And at the time, you start to pick up, and I've started to pick up that Vice Admiral Lubise was in China a couple of times. And I firstly asked him, so Admiral, so what did you see there? Why did you go to China? And he mentioned to me that he was so impressed with their shipbuilding and ship maintenance capabilities, and that we should look into that direction into the future. And also in terms of what has been done with the Chinese at the Brug, the Mobilisation Centre, where they've been involved with the maintenance of our strategic primaries and equipment in terms of landward. And also we know at other places like Walmansdal and others. Now, we know what the Auditor General has found, that in terms of the PFMA and other legislation, National Treasury legislation specifically, that this whole Operation Tusano was found to be irregular. It was found to be wasteful expenditure, and obviously was a major reason for qualified audits.
How did China get involved anyway?
It seems like what they have done now, in a very subtle way, they're reaching out to the Chinese. We know that the minister went there last year, and there was a regular visit by the chief of the Air Force was in China, the chief of the Navy was in China. So there was a subtle back and forth relationship building and showing allegiance between the two countries' military leadership. Obviously, the minister, we don't know how much he knows and how much he was just led to believe what they are doing. But the bottom line is what we are finding now is the outcome, most probably, of that interactions between military leadership of South Africa and China, and then her visit to China, where they then apparently signed some agreements. When it is sensitive, when it is highly confidential, you don't expect that the details to be put into the public domain. But as it happens with so many other things, it finds its way anyway into the public domain. And if they cannot even share the information with Parliament, and remember, Parliament should take notice and should give their support for anything other than the ordinary, then because we can ask the questions, and remember, the more we get involved on a trade basis, whether it's in military or otherwise with China, the more it will affect our negative or deficit trade balance with China, and it will impact on our capability to have funds available, amongst others, to distribute to the Defense Force.
Cuba didn't work. Why do you think China will be different or worse?
Well, we've had the Cubans. They were at the Brug, and in my opinion, and many other experts' opinion, they did not make a significant impact on what our deficits and shortages and needs were with landward material and vehicles. Because remember, the OEMs of those vehicles are South Africans, mainly Denel, but also other South African defense industry manufacturers. And there are many military veterans who was very much involved in this. We see in the case of OTT, one of their subsidiaries, the majority is owned by military veterans, and they are actually rebuilding SAMLs and RATLs and CUSPers and some of those strategic military equipment. And they are rebuilding that, refurbish that, and they sell it to other African countries, and they are in a much better position and condition than ours. So the capabilities are in South Africa. They didn't want to extend that to South Africans. They give it to the Cubans. That was a huge failure, in my opinion, and cost us billions of rands. Now, what happens with the Chinese? And that's based on the information currently available. And it follows the same pattern and path as what I have referred to as the very subtle and strategic modern imperialism into Africa. So they provide expertise, they provide the funding, they use their own people for infrastructure and not local people. And then those people stay behind. There's a debt, an obligation back to China for the money that they've invested and spent here on infrastructure. And in the case that you can't refund it or repay it, they obviously take control of that asset. And that can be a huge loss of that to any country, in this case, South Africa's capability to secure our sovereignty and assure the safety of our people.
If China controls our bases, what does that mean for South Africa's independence?
If you allow them into a strategic base like the Brug and eventually into Simonstown and other naval bases like in Durban, then you expose them to our biggest secrets, our biggest sensitive information, not just the vehicles, not just the infrastructure, but also in terms of technology that will be part of that refurbishing. And that will give them, in my opinion, a direct source of information, because we know how the Chinese work. They work in many cases like the Americans. You know, they put something in not for free. Nothing is for free. If anybody expects the Chinese to be Father Christmas and provide us 500 million rand of improvements in infrastructures and upgradings for free, they are living in a fool's paradise. It doesn't happen that way. It will never happen that way. Now, without the proper guarantees and without the proper oversight and input and insight over what they are doing, we're obviously giving away the crown jewels of the so-called crown jewels without any augmentation or any problem. Part of what South African Defence Force has done over a number of years is to contract a company, South African company, to provide the infrastructure and the equipment to assure what we call a environmentally controlled warehouses, where strategic prime mission equipment vehicles and ammunition and weapon systems were stored, dust-free, rust-free, corrosion-free, in such a case, where the temperature and the humidity, everything is controlled, so that when you need those vehicles and those equipment, that you can basically just pump up the tires, put in a battery, and you're ready to roll out. If not, then obviously everything needs to go through a major service to make sure about the corrosion and the rust and the dust and everything that goes with that. That has been a South African company provided the whole system and the maintenance as well. Eventually, the maintenance was 4 times a year. There's about 6, 7 storage facilities in South Africa like that, of which the Brug is one, and Dalmansdal is one, and there's a few in Pretoria and Durban and Cape Town. So eventually it was maintained 4 times a year. Then it was twice a year, then it was once a year, and then it was not renewed at all. I have personally, in my time as Shadow Minister, visited some of these facilities. And I've personally seen the deterioration of the equipment and the warehouses, and then personally saw on the machines that was supposed to control this environmentally, realities, where the light was on and say it needs a service, but there was no money for a service. And obviously that means that the rattles, the sawmills, the olifant, the rooi cutter, the whatever, the G5, V6, everything, air defense systems, etc., were exposed to the environmental, the impact of nature and that. So I think that is where we are, and they will, I suspect, take over that as well, and that gives them, access to all our strategic information, all our strategic equipment, and especially if the Air Force will turn to them, as a big brother, it will basically put the whole of the SANDF in the palms of the so-called the proverbial palms of the Chinese, and they will be able to use us as a puppet, and they will be the puppet masters. That is the biggest threat to our sovereignty and our democracy, in my opinion, because we know the Chinese do not embrace democracy and the values that we are standing for, even if it is in our constitution. That also means that we will most probably alienate ourselves further from the US, the European Union, and the UK, because in terms of our prime mission equipment, of which those nations are the original equipment manufacturers, that will probably result in some illegal actions between the nations, because that will most probably be seen and experienced as a direct transgression of exposing a hostile nation of theirs, a threat of theirs to their information and software and others. And we know the moment that you find yourself into the software and the technology, there's ways that the Chinese and others can try to get into the German system, American system, the UK system, and that will cause further problems. So yes, we are in, I think, for a huge challenge, and I think this strategic route around the South African coast, that is also for the Americans and European Union and other countries of strategic value, given the challenges through the Suez Canal and other waterways, that this will expose South Africa further. And I can just imagine next we will most probably see Chinese vessels in our naval bases and being part of coastal patrols and actions. And that the biggest transgressors of our sea resources are the Chinese fishing vessels, are the Chinese in terms of looting and taking away our ocean resources, our ocean economy resources.
So, Kobus, was this all done as part of classified information? So wasn't Parliament supposed to approve this kind of involvement of the Chinese government?
Well, they claim it's classified information and it is sensitive information. However, we know that the Constitution provides for the involvement of Parliament, and Parliament is not all in a public domain, so it's not all exposed to public scrutiny and the media. There is the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence, that is a total classified committee, and it's not open to the public, it's not open to media, and everybody in that committee are bound by the law not to disclose any of that information, because that's a criminal transgression. Same with the defense committees. There are two, but also they can go into what we call a committee, a confined committee situation, where it is where you're also bound by law not to disclose anything that has been discussed or conveyed in that meeting. So there are mechanisms in Parliament. So their argument that this is sensitive information, it's actually just an indication that they don't trust Parliament and they don't like the interference of Parliament. In other words, the whole principles of a democracy and how Parliament should work in a democracy, they obviously are keeping that out. And yeah, again, I will come back to what I've said with many other interviews in the past and earlier today as well, that if you have the right political leadership, you will have a much better managerial leadership in the Defence Force that will be more open to the democratic mechanisms, at least to report to Parliament, to the people, because it shouldn't come as a surprise. Because what happened with Operation Tusano with the Cubans, when I exposed that, that was basically too late. Yes, we were able to block the whole medicine smuggling into South Africa by the Military Command Council. But what has happened with any of those members? I had the Public Protector's report. There was criminal charges being laid against members of the Military Command Council. What has happened of this? Zilch so far. Absolutely nothing. Yes, we exposed them, but nothing happened. And I'm afraid that my expectation is that the Auditor General will again come out and criticize as wasteful expenditure. National Treasury will use that as another example of how they're wasting money, and it will be another motivation not to give the Defence Force any more money. And then obviously it will happen like with so many other cases. It depends on how others are benefiting personally from some of these transactions. We know from the arms, controversial arms deal earlier years, but also with the Cubans, where people individually benefits, and it might even be, a governing parties benefiting from those, and that means that they will just close their eyes. I hope that government and government of national unity will stand up to this. But yeah, one will have to see how this play out.
Could a greater Chinese involvement also have an impact on the South African defence industry?
It's not only the South African government, it's not only the Defence Force, but the impact of that on the South African defence industry, which is already vulnerable because of the poor state of procurement by the South African National Defence Force. So it will have an impact on them as well and their international standings.
So you say that this wouldn't come for free. So what do you think the Chinese government wants in return?
Well, I think first of all, it's a foothold into South Africa. If you look at the map of Africa, you will see in how many cases they've provided capital infrastructure to countries like Angola, Namibia, Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya, you can go all over the show. And you will see that they have maintained control of those infrastructures. They have brought in their own people, and their people stayed behind in South Africa. And there was always a depth towards China in that regard. And that means that was an access for them to that information. And when they have their backs against the wall, then there's basically nothing that you can do. It's also a matter of how it will alienate ourselves further from our Western trading partners, which is not good. We know that our GDP stays low compared to other African countries. We know it is an international race, basically between China and the United States. European Union. We know that the Chinese will do whatever they can to advance their position and their strategies and plans. And we know that our current military leadership tend to be more aggressive against the interest of the European Union, the UK, and America. Take the example of the chief of the SANDF openly went into Iran and talking about defense policies and position against America and all that. The love affair with Cuba, the love affair with Russia. So yes, So doesn't pose good for us, and they will have a foothold into South Africa, which they haven't had until now, and that it will only give them the platform to advance their role, and then most probably, to a certain extent, controlling, the route around the South African coast as well, maritime routes.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask, what would be the big prize for China? Simonstown?
Obviously, Simonstown. We all know that silver mine is a total mess. So, and we know that the dockyard in Simonstown is a total mess. And I expect, because Vice Admiral Lebise was so impressed with their shipbuilding capabilities and maintenance, capabilities, that the next thing that you will see is work in Simonstown base, the naval, the dockyard, and then most probably silver mine as well, because we just don't have the money and the technology for that. Well, the technology is there, but the money is not there, and the willingness to work with South African defense industry companies seems not to be there. So I can expect that to follow, and that will give them the foothold to control maritime, commercial, but also military communication and awareness of what is happening around the coast. And if they can then get a foothold into Simonstown, that will give them one of the most strategic naval bases, I think, in the world.
Kobus Marais, thank you so much.